Stephen, the murder of Malcolm McKeown has resulted in really hefty headlining sentences for two killers who have been convicted in the North, who are members essentially of an outfit called the Firm. We're going to talk about all that, but I suppose start by telling us about Malcolm McKeown and his murder.
Well, Malcolm McKeown was a sort of big fish in a little pond in the Mid-Ulster area. His crimes have gone back way over 20 years. Malcolm was a really ruthless godfather of crime who mixed with the likes of Drew King, who, in fact, Malcolm drove Drew King to court the time that Drew was actually charged with the murder of our colleague Martin O'Hagan. Those charges were obviously dropped later on, but Malcolm was his chauffeur, so he was heavily involved with those kind of guys. The murder of Malcolm McKeown came only a few days after he got out of jail himself. He was 54 years old. He was well known in crime. He was well known for being ruthless. He'd been involved in killing people himself. Most notably the Jacqueline and Hugh McGill, who basically he owed about £13,000 to reportedly, and decided, I'm not going to pay that, I'm just going to have them killed. And he got a guy called James Carlyle, who's since died, notorious criminal, to go in and kill him.
And Stephen, an unusual enough thing that, anybody in the underworld would target a couple.
But this wasn't your ordinary couple. This couple had built a fortress in the area of Craigavon where they lived, intimidated all their neighbours. If you look at pictures of their house, it was sort of sat out on its own, and it was a fortress where they happily dealt huge amounts of drugs. And they obviously dealt with Malcolm McKeown, and as often happens with these people, they fell out for whatever reason, over drugs, over a debt. And Malcolm's enforcer was this guy James Carlyle, who was actually a nephew of Jacqueline McGill, and Carlyle went into the house, was able to get in on that, into the fortress, and shot them both dead. Now the charges, they were never convicted because of a mess up over the evidence was contaminated, and those murder charges were dropped. But everybody knows those two were, Carlyle killed him and Malcolm McKeown ordered it.
So Malcolm McKeown, Stephen, at one point, because of his connections with loyalist terrorism, really, he would have at one point presumably been untouchable. But the fact is, the Firm, this new sort of emerging drugs gang, or maybe not that new, but they felt comfortable taking him out despite those long connections.
McKeown had these connections with loyalist terrorism. You'll know McKeown came from a family of McKeowns who lived in came from a little village called Ahalee in County Antrim near Lough Neagh, not far from Lisburn. There was only about 1,000 people lived there. And McKeown and two of his brothers, Clifford McKeown and Trevor McKeown, are both convicted sectarian killers. McKeown wasn't so connected to loyalists. He was more interested in crime. And in fact, I think during some feud in 1999, I think the LVF tried to kill Malcolm McKeown. Somebody tried to shoot him back in 1999 as a result of an LVF feud. So Malcolm was more interested in crime than he was with loyalism. But he's just as ruthless as his two brothers, There's a story going back that we did in 2003 where he befriended a drug dealer and got him to live beside him in Craigavon. Said, there's a house going. Malcolm told him, come and live beside me. Him and his partner went and lived there. His partner was a vulnerable woman from England who was addicted to drugs. And Malcolm started getting her to take packages of drugs. And when she got uneasy about this and didn't want to do it anymore, he basically set her up to be caught by the cops. She did a year in jail, even though she said, look, I was being forced to do this. And Malcolm McKeown, meanwhile, was still outside selling drugs. It was a very, very tragic case.
You said that was back in 2003.
Yeah, but even by then, he had a long list of violent offences and drugs, but he was ruthless. He very ruthless.
At what point does he start becoming a target?
Well, like you say, he seems to have been a target very early, because in 1999 he survived a gun attack. So I think he's always lived his life under threat, and it just seems to come with the territory.
So there's this grouping called the Firm, and we're going to go into some details of them, but they're emerging, I suppose, from, we're going to say, this sort of 2008 onwards sort of thing. They're becoming together, and they're moving from terrorism into drug dealing. Perhaps they're around earlier than that, but they become a force, and they start to target Malcolm McKeown. A number of times he survives, or there's thwarted hits on his life.
So, I mean, the Firm are this drug gang from Mid-Ulster area, and what set them apart from everybody else was they sort of post-Troubles. They have members from both Republican and Loyalist. I mean, they're family members who they're sons of former convicted Loyalist terrorists and sons of former convicted Republican terrorists. But this sort of cross-community, they came together with the one aim of trying to make as much money and sell as many drugs as possible, and they became very effective at it.
Probably not the ultimate aim of the Belfast Agreement in breaking down cultural barriers, was it? Drug dealing?
No, probably not. But that's certainly what happened.
Yeah. And obviously then there is a Dublin connection, isn't it? Because these are sort of slightly younger guys than the original sort of paramilitaries. And they start making big money, and Mid-Ulster, it's a big area, a big territory, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's. When you come out of the Troubles, during even before the Troubles in the 90s, when drugs really hit around Belfast, people going out and partying at the weekends became more than just your heroin addicts and such. It sort of hit towns like Bangor and Ballymena, but Belfast, and with the peace agreement, people just decided they were going to go out and party, and needed to buy lots of ecstasy and cocaine and speed and all that kind of thing. So there was money to be made, and the Firm have seemingly, from what I understand, since they've been connected with a number of murders, they are still very much selling a lot of drugs. They may be just doing it in a different way, and they maybe learned in the last few years that killing a lot of people just brought a lot of heat on them. So they're just quietly going about their business, selling their drugs.
And what has happened, I suppose, from this side of the border is you have the expansion of the network run by the criminal we call Mr. Big, from Coolock north to County Louth and upwards again. And he becomes the sort of supplier to the Firm, empowering them, and they merge somewhat. There's some certain individuals that would have been very heavily linked to Mr. Big, who are now based in the north, almost as his salesmen, can we say?
Living in that border area, there are people that would have grown up with Mr. Big, would have been amongst very much his inner circle. People with a notorious history of violence. We can't be naming them for legal reasons. And according to what we hear, they become one of the wholesalers into the Firm. The Firm seem to operate on a very, they control a network of dealers within their area, but they're being wholesaled from Mr. Big, and it is suspected other gangs. Now, what happens, of course, is the big story in gangland across Europe is that the EncroChat network is hacked, and some of what's been going on in the north and those connections to the south start becoming revealed in court cases. So, for example, you can see Barry Young, in particular from Sligo. He has connections with people in the north. He's supplying a number of major figures, and some of that starts to become clear. How heavily involved Dublin criminals are. And so we'll hear more of that, I suppose, as these cases continue to go through the courts.
Because, of course, Brendan O'Callaghan only recently, B-Man, I think he's known as, and a senior member of the Firm has just pleaded guilty to charges related to his EncroChat phone. He's accepted that a phone that was discovered in a field near his home, that he was on the handle of that. He's been 5 years since this EncroChat hack happened, and these cases are still coming before the courts. But he's due to be sentenced shortly in Belfast Crown Court. But he's a big player in the Firm, Stephen, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. The and I think it's what I hadn't really been named. He hadn't really come forward. One of these guys, and this is so often the case with the really big players. You never hear of. They're off sort of living the life of luxury, and they're sort of in the background. But yeah, he has. The Angro chat has certainly opened that up a wee bit, and he's by all accounts a massive cocaine dealer and has been for many years.
And a background with ATM robberies, which of course provide the capital to buy the drugs a lot of the time, the actual stealing of hard cash, which is needed. But so you've O'Callaghan who is facing sentence. We have Malcolm McKeown's killers, and tell us about them and the sentence they have just received.
So we got Jake O'Brien, I think he's 31, and Andrew Martin, who's 30. And they are, these are guys who nobody would have heard of. These aren't people who were well-known gangsters. My suspicion is, and has been claimed, that these guys were paid with drugs to do this shooting. But the fact is that the way it was carried out suggests these guys, while it was described as a professional hit, they weren't exactly the cleverest. Andrew Martin, the whole thing caved in around him when he the various phones they had and the police seized, even days after the murder, were riddled with internet searches about how to cope with murder and how to
sleep.
Murder.
I think there was one how to sleep after killing somebody.
One of the phones in 3 days had 150 searches for Malcolm McKeown. Malcolm McKeown murder, fingerprints. How much does bail cost in the UK? Can you go to America on bail with murder? Crazy things that this was seized off 5 days after he'd been stopped by the police and had other phones seized. These guys, when you see the TV shows, they just burner phones, and these guys weren't that clever. Yeah. So it's I suspect they did it for very little money or for some drugs.
They were the lackies, but they've got a massive sentence.
Yeah, massive sentence. They got 24 and 26 years, 50 years between them, and that's even before they can be considered for parole. There's a lot of murders have happened in this country, and people who got a lot less sentences than that. But those are the sentences probably people should get for that kind of murder. But
I suppose, was the McKeown murder, do either of you know, was it a power move by the firm, or was it a personal vendetta by somebody? He obviously was a target for many years, and McKeown was somebody who was at the very top of his game in organised crime. Yeah. He was linked to Drew King, etc., back in his heyday, I suppose. But was this a power move? Was this the firm saying, we can do this?
I don't know whether it was them doing that or whether it was a revenge for one of the searches that Mr. Martin had made on his phone was Malcolm McKeown owes Hugh McGill money. So obviously Hugh McGill, who was in that house with his partner, his wife, Sarah Jacqueline, who was murdered. So whether that was one of the things he was told, that's why you're going to kill this guy, because he owed, and maybe it was revenge for something so far back. It's claimed it was a drug deal that he owed the money for drugs. Whether it was that money that he just, and they weren't going to let that lie, and he just refused to pay it, or whether it was other money, I'm not sure. And I don't think we'll ever know, because the people who hired these two Egypts, these two killers, they were never before the court. Somebody hired these guys. These guys didn't do this off their own bat.
And one of the extraordinary things about it, Stephen, of course, is that we have pictures of these guys at a previous attempt wearing pig masks. And I actually said it to Chloe, who's working with us. Did you see those pictures? And she can't believe they didn't actually go with pig masks, but of course they had done. And you've written about this for us. Tell us about that previous hit and how Malcolm McKeown didn't seem to take it seriously almost.
These two guys, and we know it was them, and we were able to say it was them because they've been convicted, they've been jailed, and the case is over. But we had reported back at the time, just a couple of weeks after he was murdered, that these guys had turned up at McKeown's house wearing these two pig masks, very sinister looking, and they hung around the house for a while. They had guns. It was clear they were there for shooting. Once again, not the brightest. They obviously know when you go to Malcolm McKeown's house, there's going to be CCTV everywhere. They're caught on camera, but that what they also hadn't bothered to check was Malcolm McKeown was in jail, so they were never going to get him. Once it exposed the fact that these guys were sloppy, these guys didn't know what they were really doing, but it didn't put them off. And I mean, we know from people he spoke to inside jail that Malcolm McKeown wrote about and spoke to people, and he said that he was aware of the threats and he made jokes about it. He sort of made light of it, described himself. I mean, Malcolm used to call himself his gang the Malaban, and he used to refer to himself as that. And he'd like to be called Big Mal. He knew these guys were coming for him, but he just was quite arrogant about it,
And we've seen outfits bigger than the firm, the Kinahan cartel, for example, take on hapless would-be hitmen. They don't really care. These guys are disposable to them. They're the ones that are probably going to, face the big sentences should anything go amiss. And should anything go amiss, of course, then they don't even have to pay them. So it's win-win for them. So, they will hire these big groupings, powerful groupings will hire all sorts of people, anybody willing to take up a gun in times of war or feuding. But the firm, if we look at the McKeown hit and others they've been linked to, they are, stamping their power in the north as being the most significant grouping. And anybody that, sort of owes them money, even a small drug debt, or anyone who's seen as a rival, they are showing and communicating that they are willing to take them out. I mean, there's another number of murders they're suspected of, Niall.
Yeah, I mean, they have, obviously there's other cases that are coming before the courts, but they have been linked to, for example, the murder of Shane Whitlaw. And it's also said that they've been in dispute, let's put it that way, with some of the Republican paramilitaries in Belfast, Stephen.
And well, I think as well as the murder of Kevin Conway is that another one of theirs that is in Belfast. So, another murder. But yeah, like I said before, I think that was they've been linked about those three murders in a very short period of time, and I think that really brought a lot of heat on them. I think it put a lot of pressure on them. The police maybe decided to pay a bit more attention to them, but like I say, that hasn't made them go away, and they've still been dealing with. I mean, I know there's always chat about dealing with the likes of East Belfast UVF, who would be one of the next other biggest drug gangs still operating in Northern Ireland. I mean, the police have come down very hard on them, but they're still there. Every week it seems there's another claim of more drugs and more cash being found connected to that gang. So yeah, there's still paramilitary links, but most of these paramilitary gangs they're not really loyalists to Republican anymore. They're just crime gangs using that name,
And it's a funny thing, Stephen, because obviously there's reports this week about controversy over Irish signs in is it a train station or whatever. But on another level, people involved in these, even these paramilitary groupings, they are willing to deal with each other. And that's probably gone on for years, has it, where when it comes to drug dealing and money, some of the sectarian stuff drops away, doesn't it?
Oh no, absolutely, definitely. I mean, and that was what was always said in the 90s. Whenever the ecstasy craze was going, everybody was saying that it would have gone around Republican areas because everybody at the time was taking ecstasy tabs, going to raves, and it was basically saying because a lot of those, all the tabs were basically being brought in by loyalist paramilitaries and specifically the Shankill UDA. So everybody would have been going around Republican areas saying if you're buying an ecstasy tablet, you're funding loyalist terrorism, But yeah, those sort of borders sort of dropped, But people were happy to do business when it comes to so long for making money.
Are the firms showing their wealth at this stage, and do they do so, in gaudy fashion north of the border?
I don't think so. I mean, like I say, the main players, we know the names of some of them. We can't name them for legal reasons, but I don't think we're not talking like you said before, we're not talking the Kinahans here. I mean, I'm sure I'm sure there's somebody pulling their strings somewhere, probably living in Dubai or Spain, who we maybe don't know or can't name. But there's no signs there's no signs of that.
They're making a lot of money and it's going somewhere, but they clearly have a very well structured laundering network as well, and undoubtedly are moving the money to Spain. Can I throw that in as a bit of a guess? Just don't know where that came from, but just an awful lot of the drug money from this country still makes its way to Spain and into properties, etc. So, there's a lot of money there in those regions where they're supplying the cocaine. We know how much the cocaine market is in this country, and that is a good part of the turf. You're talking Louth up into Armagh, up into Belfast, and the surrounding areas of Down and throughout Antrim, really.
I'll throw up a name from the past. A guy, maybe you remember a guy called Gary Marno. That was one of Malcolm McKeown's big suppliers. He was his best. They were very close friends from the same part of Mid Ulster, really. But Gary Marno had gone on the run in Spain, and was a big time supplier. Was brought back on extradition and served about 30 months. Has gone back and is living in a big palace in Torrevieja, But Marno and his brother were major drug suppliers and very close to Malcolm McKeown.
Okay, so I suppose we'll come back to this story when we get to the sentencing of Brendan O'Callaghan.
Yeah.
And we'll keep an eye on other associates of the firm and what's happening as regards those murder inquiries. So for today, thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.